is Greg Anderson from Southern Lord Records and the band Sunn. I grew up in Seattle, and in Seattle I was involved in two bands. One was called Thor's Hammer and the other one was called Burning Witch. And both bands were with longtime friend, collaborator, Stephen O'Malley. But the bands were sort of short-lived. They only lasted for like, maybe a year or so, but they both managed to make recordings that I thought were really I thought they were really good recordings, and I was really proud of them. But there was no labels that were interested in putting them out, really. At least the resources at that time too. There weren't as many outlets or labels or people interested in really extreme heavy music. So they sat on the shelf for a while, and then I ended up moving to Los Angeles and started playing some music with some people down here. And one person in particular, a bass player for the band that I had started called Snake, was a huge fan of those two records, those two recordings, and he kept on telling me that they needed to come out somehow. It's like, okay, that's great, but how? And he's like, how about I give you the money and you start it, we start a label. You and Steven start a label, put those out. So that's what we did. He loaned us a couple grand, and we put them out on compact disc. At the time, this is 1998. So 1998, 1999, I think Burning Witch came out a year later. So that was the beginning. It was really the label. The aspirations was just to put those two records out. There was no expectations or like, oh yeah, we've started this label and we're going to continue, we're going to release all this stuff. It was like, let's just get these things out. So we kind of just kept on going. I mean, really, it was just, it was pretty simple as far as like, the money we earned from the first two records, we put into the next two records, which was The Obsessed, and then we did a record from Electric Wizard. Just a few releases here and there at the beginning, but it started to pick up some momentum, and people really started to kind of pay attention to what we were doing, because the quality was definitely part of the focus was the quality and the packaging, and even though it was compact disc, it was still, we really put a lot of effort into everything, made everything have a certain aesthetic and vibe to it. It was strong. In the late 90s, vinyl was just, it was kind of dead. It wasn't really something, and it was really expensive too, and finding the right place. I just didn't know. I didn't know who to contact or what to do. It was good. CDs were so easy and so inexpensive, and your margin on those was so large that it made it possible for you to sustain. But vinyl was like, well, first of all, there's not really a market for it, and second of all, it's really expensive, and third of all, it's like the production is just a whole mysterious element. The first distributor that the label ever had was in the UK called Southern Distribution, and they their history is Discord Records and Touch and Go Records and Crass and things like that. So of course they were very knowledgeable about vinyl, even though the market had declined for it, but they knew how to do it. So we did. I believe that Another Mono Generator was pressed on vinyl in limited quantities, and the first, or that Snake EP, Dog Days, was done on vinyl, and those were pressed over there. So the copies that we got here were just imported from them. Obviously now the vinyl resurgence is being embraced, and taken over in some ways by the major labels. So it's not just independent music. To me, that's where it started, and that's where it got its legs, and its kind of its popularity was people in the underground and independent music that were into independent music, independent labels, indie bands, as a way of like realizing that it's a great way to experience the music that they have made. And also there's this sort of, I think, at least in the independent music world, there's this sort of unspoken, I don't know, rhetoric that your money that you put down on this artist, you spend for this artist's vinyl or their music, goes direct, it helps support them, helps them sustain, helps them be able to continue to make music. To me, that's, at least, and I know, that rings true for Southern Lord and the vinyl that we do, is that I think that a lot of people know that when they put down their money for something and spend it, it's helping sustain they're directly supporting it. I was kind of a holdout for CDs, actually. I've always had a turntable and a receiver, and like an old 70s receiver, and that was my preferred way of listening to music, was on vinyl. And I didn't really actually get a CD player until like 1991 or something like that. The reason I had switched over to listening to CDs mostly was because they weren't making vinyl. Bands weren't putting the records out on vinyl anymore, like around the early mid 90s. But I've always kept my turntable and listened to records, the old records. There was a time when new records didn't seem to be being made when a band released an album, it wasn't coming out on LP. But I've always been a fan of vinyl. To me, it was always about the jacket, and having that 12 by 12 canvas to see the band's artwork and everything in that size. And then I liked sitting down, listening to the record, holding the record, reading the lyrics, reading the thank you list, the liner notes. That to me is like, I like that experience of sitting down with the vinyl. So I'm not opposed to CDs or iPods or digital format, but my preferred way is if I have the time and I have the record in my hand, put it on turntable. So, but I unfortunately don't always have that luxury to do it. So it's not so much how you listen to music so much that's important to me. It's about listening to music, period. When I first really got into music, I got into metal and punk in the mid 80s, and it was really hard to find music. First of all, to find where to buy it. There was no magazines really. There was maybe one or two, and you could mail order things, which is fun. It was like Christmas all the time at your mailbox, but it took a really long time, and you took a lot of chances because you didn't know what these records sounded like, and you were just kind of going on your gut, or some, a lot of times it's funny, like in the 80s, like if you got a record that you really liked, you would scan the thank you list, because most of the times bands thanked other bands that they liked or that were their friends, so you're like, oh, I really like this, I really like Agnostic Front, so I want to see what bands they're into, or whatever. So that's a lot of times, and you take these real, these chances where, and when you're younger, you don't have as much money usually, or you didn't have hardly any money, so it was really challenging to and the discovery of music was really slow, and it's not nearly as easy it is now, which to me, like the internet, to me it's this giant, I kind of think of it sometimes as this giant listening station, and like you can just like check something out and see if it's great, and if you like it, then you buy it. You could buy the vinyl, or you so many things. Like back when I was getting into this kind of music, even if like your friend played you something and you wanted to buy it, it's like, well, where do you get this thing? It'd be really difficult. There's not very many resources or outlets for this kind of music. There's so many more opportunities for people now to discover music and hear music, which I think is amazing. And I think the internet is, obviously that's the whole reason for it. I think that whole thing, just the fact that people are experiencing and able to listen to more music than before, I think that's a great thing, and I think that's good for, I think that's great for everybody. It's great in general. Music is an amazing thing, and I'm glad that people can hear it, So I definitely am a champion for internet and streaming, and a lot of people ask, well, is that cutting into your profits or anything? It's like, I really sort of think that people that listen to this kind of music, they're going to support it, and they're going to buy the vinyl, or they're going to go to the band's live show. They're going to pay for a ticket, they're going to buy a shirt at the show or something like that. So I think for this kind of music, for underground independent music, I think it's a very positive thing, and I think it all works out. On a major label, that's a whole other story. That's a different set. It's a different can of worms. That I'm just speaking for the scene or the music, the world that we're involved in. When I was a kid, I got really into into punk rock and hardcore in the 80s. I was really into trading tapes with people all around the world, and I got really excited about letting people know in other places about bands that I really liked that were local bands, or brand new bands that, and vice versa. Like I would get these tapes in the mail and discover all of a sudden like all these new bands that lived in, Ohio or Texas or something, and I would send them bands from the Seattle area. So, but I really like that whole interaction and that sort of exposure, and like just being really excited about something and going, oh man, people need to hear this. This is so awesome. This is such a great thing. Sharing that with people and seeing people connect with it, and being a part of that process is what really has sort of been what's kept me going at running the labels. The same thing. It's like, oh, you discover a band for the first time, or you just get really, wow, this is amazing. People need to hear this. This is so great. This is so much better than a lot of the other crap that's out there, which is something I find myself thinking a lot of times these days. Like, man, people need to know this band, because these other bands that people say are great are shit compared to this, So, I think as long as my motivation is there for that, I can't see me stopping. I'm just looking at right now. I'm just kind of looking at what we have next year. We've got some really great releases that I'm really excited about. So that's what's kind of keeping the fire burning right at the moment.
This video is sponsored by AudioQuest. Turntables and speakers need cables, and records need cleaning brushes. AudioQuest makes both and more. Since the early 80s, AudioQuest has made high-quality audio products that match excellent performance with great value. I've used AudioQuest's record brush, and I've had their cables in my audio system for years. And when I'm traveling, I always bring a Dragonfly digital audio converter with me on the road. To check out AudioQuest's selection of quality audio accessories, and to locate a dealer near you, go to audioquest.com. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.